All right, hello everyone. I think we're going to get started. Thank you for attending this session. It's titled Investing in Social Cohesion to Create More Resilient Communities. This session is part of the APA New York Upstate Chapter 2020 Virtual Conference. My name is Dan Theobald. My colleague Bob Murphy and I will be your co-hosts for this session, while Laura Lorenko will be the moderator and fielding your questions. Before we get started, we'd like to thank our sponsor for the session, Elan, Planning, Design, and Landscape Architecture. Without our partners, this virtual conference would not be possible. Just to let everybody know, all sessions are being recorded and attendees will receive an email link to the recordings once they've been posted. All attendees are automatically muted throughout the entirety of this session. If you have any questions, you can submit them to the Q&A box and you'll see that at the bottom of your screen. We'll address the questions at the end of the presentation. There are CM credits available for this session, and the CM credit number is 920-5088. This will also be posted in the chat box. I will now turn the presentation over to Laura Lorenko, who will introduce herself, the panelists, and go ahead and begin the presentation. All right, Laura.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining our presentation. I'm going to start with an overview of the theory, and then I'll pass it over to our speakers to show us what this looks like in practice. So let's jump right into it. There we go. First, a little introduction to the term social cohesion. Essentially, social cohesion is the willingness of people to join with others in a community at various levels to survive and prosper. In heterogeneous societies, building cohesion is often this ongoing process that requires continuous effort to integrate newcomers and build trust between different groups. This trust can be eroded by high levels of inequality, social and economic exclusion, corruption, lack of accountability, and inadequate legal protections of human rights. By definition, of course, cohesion is particularly low in areas with more violence, and this can be overt, like gun violence, or it could be covert, for example, racism, or areas that have a history of conflict. In more stable societies, we often underestimate the importance of social cohesion because the negative impacts are often confined to more vulnerable populations day to day. And only in moments of exceptional crisis do they really spiral out and impact the broader society. And then even sometimes they can be patched over, leading to these cycles of violence and exclusion and generational trauma. So we're going to dip briefly into the theory and make sure you're getting your credits worth here. There is a long literature, not expecting you to be able to read this all, but just an overview of the different discussions and definitions in the theory and the literature. And this goes back to the 1890s. One of the earliest definitions here comes from Durkheim, who was a French sociologist studying suicide. And he brings in these ideas of social cohesion as relating to interdependence between individuals, the absence of latent social conflict, and the presence of strong social bonds. And these ideas are still pretty relevant today, and kind of the discussions evolved from this foundation that Durkheim laid out here. So there are various levels of social cohesion, from individual to group to community to institutional cohesion, and then up to nation state and even supranational cohesion. We'll be focusing a bit more on community and institutional levels, since that really connects well with the planning profession. Those other definitions that were briefly on the screen, you could see there was a lot of variation. These are a lot of the common components, though, that come out across disciplines, across psychology, political science, environmental studies, etc. We see that trust, sort of the biggest one here, is particularly important when measuring social cohesion. It comes into most of these definitions. And this essentially boils down to community members' belief that they share the norm of not cheating each other. And research has shown that high trust levels correlate to well-functioning democracies, economic growth, and general satisfaction with living in a modern society. Now, some criticisms of the theory and the field is that, first of all, social cohesion is not always an end in and of itself. A society might have a high level of cohesiveness, but actually be very exclusive or intolerant. So important to note that it's one of several factors. It's also not an excuse. It shouldn't be used as an excuse to ignore material differences in society. And there is a bit of a lack in the literature of practical research on how to apply this in modern, diverse societies. So then why is it important to us? Well, it's really an essential component of resilience is what we're going to talk about today. And I think 2020 has certainly demonstrated how our neighbors, our local communities typically form the front line of local crisis response. And communities that trust their neighbors and their institutions are really better able to come together before, during, and after a crisis to identify and address vulnerabilities. These might be poor housing, health risks, food insecurity, language barriers, etc. And this can reduce the severity of the primary and the secondary impacts of a crisis, either from physical, social, economic, or political stresses. And this is especially relevant in prolonged crises. So as opposed to a tornado, something like a pandemic or a heat wave or political unrest. It's also it's gained more prominence in recent years in discussions of sustainable and resilient communities. For example, it was included as a key driver in the city resilience framework that ARP put together that was used by the 100 Resilient Cities program originated by the Rockefeller Foundation. So that's an example of how it comes into a planning framework here more recently. It's also come up in discussions on integration in communities that receive large numbers of newcomers, including immigrants and refugees. So this conversation has come around more and more. In terms of the relevance for planning, the good news is that local governments can really be key partners for trust building. And this is because many of those factors those components that were on the previous slide relate to good governance. So local governments, planners, and their partners can positively increase social cohesion in their community and draw on this to achieve and preserve development gains. That's the idea. So as mentioned earlier, researchers have noted there is a bit of a gap in the practical research, though, in the role of governance and institutions in fostering social cohesion in modern, large, and multicultural societies that depend on trust among strangers, basically, for society and complex institutions to function, and that rely on finding ways to foster unity while also embracing diversity. So it certainly is a challenge in modern societies. So the field has looked a bit more into the gray literature from institutions and practitioners to see how this is being handled in practice, to find some common elements and guideposts for planners. So some of these are here on the slide. First of all, social cohesion it needs to be actively built and maintained. It's not something that's sort of just passive. It really is something you can work toward and should be working toward on a continuous basis. And it's a foundation that enables groups to work together toward common goals, which is, of course, very important for planning. It's eroded, as I said at the very beginning, by social and economic exclusion, by corruption and lack of accountability, and inadequate legal frameworks for the protection of human rights participation. But fortunately, it is also supported by the good practices here that really define the planning profession. So even though it can seem like a rather abstract concept, there are really concrete ways that we can use the touch points in our profession to build on and maintain social cohesion in our communities. So at the top here, I want to give some of our key messages we're hoping to communicate throughout the session. So first of all, as I was just alluding to, local governments are really key partners for trust building. They can positively influence social cohesion in their communities by applying these good governance techniques to actively reduce exclusion and build trust between different groups, taking advantage of pre-existing touch points, planning and activities that you're already doing. The second thing is not to neglect it. It can be easy to maybe not be aware of it in day-to-day non-crisis moments, which isn't exactly 2020, but it's really good to think about it as sort of a preventative measure for the health of your community. And it's important to consider that the lack of cohesion really poses a significant barrier to planning and socioeconomic development at times. So it's really worth making sure it's there when you need it, investing on it early and often. Last, one of the messages is to address vulnerabilities continuously, proactively, and holistically, relating to the two above points. So the idea here is having plans in place to identify and reduce vulnerabilities before a crisis, also during and after a crisis, and to work with both established groups and the vulnerable communities to build this mutual understanding, mutual trust, and social connections. So without further ado, giving credit where some of those points are coming from, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, and our speakers will be illustrating some of the points that the theory is pointing to in practice. So our first speaker today is Sue Caravana. She's AICP, and she's my colleague and a senior planner with Elan. And for the past 30 years, Sue has assisted communities across New York State and Virginia as well to prepare economic and community-based plans that are grounded in public engagement. And using creative techniques to gather public input, she has guided communities to create plans that balance land use, economic development, and quality of life issues. And she's here to share some of those lessons learned and how they connect with building social cohesion. Sue, over to you.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate the intro. So you can go to the next slide. So when I was doing research, I stumbled across this image online. This is from the University of Kansas Urban Planning Program. And I kind of laughed because I think when all of us became planners, that was our goal, save the world, be a planner, make things a better place. And so what I'm going to talk about is what the planner's role can be in building social cohesion within a community. Next slide. As Laura explained, social cohesion, as defined by the Encyclopedia of Quality of Life and Well-Being, social cohesion refers to the extent of connectiveness and solidarity among groups in society. And it goes on further to kind of say this can be on two different dimensions. So you have a horizontal dimension, and that's the relationship among community members. And this can be just a general trust of your neighbors, the willingness to help people out, cooperate, and an acceptance of diversity. And then on the vertical dimension, we sort of have the sense of belonging to community. And this is what Laura was talking about. Really, there needs to be a trust between the community and the government, local elected officials, and there needs to be that perception of fairness. Next slide, please. So while planners think we can save the world, we can't do it alone. We can't do this independently, but we can take steps on, I said, that vertical dimension to influence the relationships among members within the community. Make it an easy place to get to know your neighbors, a safe environment. So when you're developing a public park or a facility, make sure that it is programmed for people of all races, religions, abilities, ADA accessible. If you're doing a park, make it autism friendly. You also have an opportunity with community gardens. We're working with Luis on a project in Albany, and we did a lot of stakeholder interviews, and we were talking to one woman who said she moved into the neighborhood. She didn't really know anybody. She didn't necessarily feel safe in her community. And she joined the community garden. And by going out there and having a shared interest, spending time with her neighbors, getting to know them, she saw friendly faces when she was out on the street, and she felt a sense of pride and comfort in her community. If your community doesn't already have a neighborhood association, a neighborhood watch, or an annual community event, you could encourage them to get that established. Again, with the city of Albany, the community that we're working on has a very strong neighborhood association, and they can bring up issues and discuss. Luis attends these meetings, so he is a familiar face, and that builds trust among the community and local government. Next slide, please. You can also enhance the sense of belonging to the community. This was that vertical dimension I was talking about. And as planners, it's really important for us to be a resource for the less enfranchised. One of the recommendations I have is no community is perfect. You could have issues that you've had problems with policing in the past. You've had an administration that perhaps hasn't focused on your community, either through funding or implementing programs. In some communities, there's a history of redlining, and these all could, raise issues. Acknowledge the problem, discuss it, and say, we recognize that this happened. We're looking for solutions. How do we overcome this and move forward? Building trust through the community and government through public engagement is key. One of the first things that we do when we come into a project is identify and engage with community, business, and nonprofit leaders. They're respected in the community, they're familiar faces, and if you get to know them, they can help you getting the word out on projects and sort of, again, building that trust. And finally, promote mutual respect. When people think about social cohesion, they tend to think everybody's got to be on the same page. Everybody's got to agree. And as planners, we know that rarely happens in a neighborhood. What we need is for people to feel that they have a voice and to respect each other, even if they disagree. And some of the ways that Alon does that when we do public engagement is we found that instead of doing a public meeting where somebody can grab the mic and get up and the arguments break out, we've switched to what we call an open house. And we have interactive boards, and people come in and they write down their thoughts sort of anonymously, answer questions, put them on the board, and then we can bring them up for discussion later. Another option is online or mail-in surveys. Next slide. So several years ago, Alon had the privilege of working out in Council Bluffs, Iowa. The city was awarded an EPA Brownfield area-wide planning grant to develop a revitalization plan for the mid-city neighborhood. This was an economically distressed neighborhood. It was characterized by low income, severe blight. They did still have some businesses in the area, but some industrial sites, but a lot of real and perceived environmental contamination. There was also a real distrust between the city government and the neighborhood residents. Traditionally, this was not the neighborhood that came out to public meetings. In fact, when we met with the planning director and we proposed what we'd like to do for public engagement, he just started laughing. He said, "You'll be lucky if you get one person to show up." I said, okay. We also found out before the project started that the city had learned about this EPA grant. A lot of misinformation was out there, and they thought that the EPA monies were going to be used to buy up properties. So people were fearful that they were going to lose their home or their business through eminent domain. So that was a big concern and a big obstacle. Next slide, please. So after meeting with the planning department, we decided that the real thing we needed to here is get some of that social cohesion going and really start to build trust again between this neighborhood and the city. And we came up with different ideas. So we did the traditional where you have a public meeting. We created a dedicated project website so people could come and learn more about the program and what upcoming events were there. And then recognizing not everybody can come out to a public meeting, especially in a disenfranchised community. Sometimes you're working or you can't get childcare or transportation can be an issue. So we created an online survey. We also developed a series of non-traditional tools. And the very first thing we did was, before we even traveled out to Iowa, is we found out who are the leaders within this neighborhood. Who are the business leaders, the not-for-profit leaders, the community leaders. And we knew there was a lot of anger, fear, distrust. So before even going out there, I found out their names, their contact information, and I made calls. And I explained to them what was going on, what the grant's purpose was. And then we invited these folks to actually serve on the steering committee, and they were going to drive the process and get the word out. They played a critical role in this project. We engaged them to market all of the events, because for City Hall to send out a notice saying there's a public meeting, not a lot of people are going to come. But if your neighbors, your friends, your business cohorts talk about it, there's a better chance you're going to come out. We also decided to do a really intensive week-long design charrette. We had a workshop, and the photos that are here are actually who came out. And so while the city said to us, you're lucky if you get one person to come out, we had packed houses for every event. And I think that was in big part to the local members of the community really promoting and encouraging people to come out. We had drop-in hours. So if you weren't able to attend the workshop, you were invited to come out and sit with the designers and talk one-on-one about what your project ideas were. We had mobile events, which I'll talk to next. But overall, just through this process of meetings, we were able to reach 350 people in a very small neighborhood. Next slide, please. Again, I know a lot of planners do this now, but I encourage you, go mobile. It's the best way to build social cohesion, especially in disadvantaged communities where people traditionally haven't come out to meetings or haven't been engaged and involved. For Council Bluffs, we developed an informational flyer and a very brief 3-question intercept survey. And through those surveys, we got an additional 300 people to provide input on this. Anytime there was an event, we were there. So we partnered with local businesses and organizations, and these photos on the bottom, there was a family wellness fair, we were there. Railway Inn, that was sort of the hub of this neighborhood. Everybody went to Railway Inn, so we worked with the business owner. He let us come in, and I went up and down the bar handing out surveys and got people's feedback. This neighborhood also had a series of sand volleyball courts, and they had about 100 people coming out per night to participate in these tournaments. And again, we worked with the organizer, we got permission and surveyed the folks that were coming into the community so we could find out if we were to revitalize this neighborhood, what would you want to see? What would cause you to stay here, to move here, to relocate here? And that was really valuable feedback as well. Next slide, please. I also encourage you to reach out to different age groups. Again, in Council Bluffs, partnered with the YMCA. And we said, we really want to get the seniors' opinions. And they said, okay, be here at 5:45 a.m. So we showed up with our coffee and we were there at 5:45 a.m. and we caught seniors who were coming in and out of classes and talked to them about the project and what they'd like to see. We also partnered with the YMCA. They had a summer camp in the neighborhood. And we said, hey, can we borrow your kids for an hour and a half and do some visioning exercises with them and find out what the youth want in you? And if you look at the picture in the lower left side, through the visioning exercise, the kid in the blue shirt there, when we asked him, what do you want your community to be? He said, a place where everybody wants to come visit. And that became the tagline for this project. This also builds trust at a young age by getting kids involved in civic events. The picture in the middle is from one of our open houses for a project. We usually set up a kids table, and that allows parents to go through and answer the questions while we ask kids, what is it you'd like to see? Dog park is usually the #1 answer on that. And the picture in the lower right is actually from the village of Northville. We engaged the local school district for that project. And we said, we're going to have an open house and we'd love to hear from the kids. And I was overwhelmed that we had 3 different classes, school classes. They prepared PowerPoint presentations and reports and submitted them to us. And at the end of the day, we adopted, or we've included, a lot of these kids' project ideas into the local waterfront revitalization plan. So I really encourage you to partner with both seniors and the youth to build an additional layer of trust. Next slide, please. So I understand a lot of the things that I've talked about were pre-COVID, pre-pandemic. As we all know, public engagement has really changed in the last 6 months. Alon has switched over to public engagement tools. We market a little bit differently, and we collect data a little bit differently. For marketing, we still do a traditional one-page press release and send that out to print and electronic media to let them know about an event. But in addition to that, we create a 2 to 3 sentence summary of what the project is going to be on a flyer. And we send that out, we put it on a community's website, but we also partner with the local library, with the Boys and Girls Club, with local businesses. And we ask them, could you please put this on your Facebook page and get the message out? And if timing is right, we've done inserts in municipal water bills or tax bills to let people know about coming events. For the online engagement itself, Alana has switched over to doing online surveys, and we've had tremendous response rates. I've actually been very pleasantly surprised. With one community, it was a small village. We had maybe 20, 25 people come to our first open house event, and we were very pleased with the response we got. We switched over to using an online survey, and we had over 170 people participate in the second event. We kept an online survey very simple, very user-friendly, kept it open for 2 weeks, collected data, and again, I think this is something that Alon will continue to do post-COVID. You can do do-it-yourself videos. In the picture with the city of Gloversville, LWRP, you can see Mayor DeSantis in the top corner, and he did a video to introduce the project to people and let them know what was going on in the community. And another option is virtual town halls. Next slide, please. So in summary, whether you're doing something in person or virtual, there's a lot of opportunities for planners to build social cohesion through public engagement. I'm very proud to report in the City of Council Bluffs that a lot of the ideas that were generated during the planning process have actually been implemented. We stay in touch with the planning office, and they said that this trust has lasted after the project ended, and they're actually empowered the neighborhood, and they are now more engaged and more involved in future projects. And we were, the city was awarded an APA award in public outreach for the project. So it was a success overall. Thank you. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Shelley, who's going to share her experiences.
Thank you, Sue. So our next speaker is Shelley Callahan. She's the executive director of the Center in Utica, New York. The Center has been around since 1981, and it assists refugees, immigrants, and those with limited English language proficiency throughout the integration process, helping them to achieve independence through services that help to build a community with many cultures. Shelley has been with the Center since 2006, has been very busy this past year with many of the challenges that have come up during the pandemic. And prior to that, she worked for many years in DC as an editor in legal publishing, including in the United States Supreme Court Reporter of Decisions Office. So some different experiences with institutions and integrations and social cohesion. So Shelley, over to you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for inviting me here today. So yeah, we were incorporated in 1981. We used to be known as the Mohawk Valley Resource Center for Refugees. We changed our name about 2 years ago because we thought that was kind of a mouthful, and also because we wanted a name that captured all the services and programs that we have. So we have resettled over the last about 40 years over 16,500 refugees into the city of Utica. Thousands of secondary migrants have joined those, and secondary migrants are refugees that have been resettled to other parts of the US and then move wherever they want, in this case, Utica. And they come from about 36 different countries. So our diversity is diverse. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to put up the vision and the mission of the center. When you invited me to speak here, I actually wasn't familiar with the term social cohesion. And I was a little worried that I, didn't quite know what I knew about it. But when I looked at our vision and our mission, I realized that we have been doing social cohesion work since our inception. So our vision is to lead in building community with many cultures, and our mission is to develop the products and services that enable us to in building community with many cultures. So, you know, social cohesion is a relatively new term to me, but we've been doing it for a very long time in Utica. Next slide, please. Just a little context about Utica. So back in the early 1900s, about 30%, maybe a little bit more of Utica was foreign born. A lot of people are surprised to hear that, but largely European immigrants. So, you know, the Italians, the Irish, the Germans, the Poles, a lot of those folks came in the early 1900s and they really built this city. And so there was a steep population decline in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. I think a lot of Rust Belt cities, as they're sometimes called, have experienced this population decline. And but for the influx of refugees, and those are the green, so in this graph, the green part is the foreign born or the immigrants. And so when you look in the 1990s and the 2000s there, the only growth, the only population that's growing is the foreign born community. And the refugee center, with its thousands of refugees coming in, really did save the city of Utica from catastrophic population decline. We could have gone below 60,000 or 50,000 residents. And that would have had horrible, horrible consequences for the entire community. Next slide, please. And so this is just a little deeper look into the demographics. And these numbers will probably change a little bit when the census comes out, although that's been a fraught endeavor this year, but we've been working on the census with some partners too. So roughly about 27% of the community in Utica speaks a language other than English at home. And that is really, really important if you're looking at community dynamics and social cohesion and, you know, who's getting what messages. If you don't understand the language of all the opportunities that are being presented in a community, then you really are marginalized in an enormous way. So it's really good to understand who's in your community, how do they communicate, what is their culture, you know, where do they come from? Next slide, please. So this is just a listing of some of the services that we have at the center. We do many, many things. We have employment services, we have immigration and citizenship services, traffic safety. But I want to focus on the Welcome Center and one of our language services, translation. And that has been so important in what we have done in terms of the services we provide to our community. I also want to talk about, when you look at this list of services, our refugee center is so incredibly unique because we face not only the new coming refugees, the newly arriving immigrants, we really provide services to the receiving community, and we have always done that. And I don't think I realized how unique that was until the UNHCR sent a team of folks to look at what Utica was doing in 2005 and devoted an entire magazine to the programs and the city itself, and coined the term that Utica was the town that loves refugees. And this is the magazine that was produced. We're really proud of this, but really it spoke to what we were doing was special and forward thinking at the time. I think a lot of folks are doing more of that now, but we were really on the front end of that. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we do and have done for probably 20 years is provide cultural competency training. And we provide training to everybody, employers, medical service providers, schools, colleges, professional associations. And we have provided cultural competency training to the entire Utica Police Department and the fire department over the years. And so, you know, we've been doing this for 20 years. We're constantly upgrading and tweaking the curriculum. We have professional trainers. And so I just wanted to give you a little flavor of what cultural competency looks like, understanding that each one is specialized to whoever we're delivering the training to. But the general themes I have listed here in a slide, you know, connection to others, group orientations, relationships. We talk about communication styles and language, and we talk about concepts of time. And so those are the big 3 things that when we're doing a training, we make sure that we hit all those themes. Could you go to the next one? So some of the quotes we might use, so a cultural competency training might start out with things like this. And a lot of times we really try and manage how many folks are in a training, because we like to do a lot of exercises and group discussions, and you can't do that if a group's too big. So when we did the police department, we broke the entire department up into smaller groups, and we had 8 trainings. And they were broken up into those groups so that we could really talk with everybody. Nobody could hide in the trainings. We really like dynamic trainings. And we might start with quotes like these. All people see the world not as it is, but as they are. And we also like to use this quote: other cultures are not failed attempts at being you. They are unique manifestations of the human spirit. A lot of times we'll talk to people about you know, triggers and filters. And, you know, if you hear someone speaking a different language, you know, why might you feel nervous or angry, or what's going on there? So we really try and look at things and really get people to think about and understand that, you know, this is all part of being human, all these wonderful languages, all these different cultures. It's a wonderful thing, and Utica is blessed to have so much of it around us. Next slide, please. So when I talk about filters, cultural competency training is not about understanding everything about every culture in the world. That would be impossible. What it's really about is understanding our filters. And so one of the things we might use as an example is our little map activity. And so for me, this map, Mercator's map, is the map that I grew up with. It's the map that when I was in school and the teacher pulled down that screen, this is the map that I saw. This was my worldview. Next slide, please. Over the years, it's been talked about how Mercator's map isn't really accurate. It's a useful tool for navigation, but it does not reflect the reality of the size of the continents, how they're aligned, really, you know, where they're at. And Peter's map actually does that. So there's been this, you know, discussion, sometimes argument going on for years and years, map makers and educators about which map is the one to use. And, you know, would it change your thoughts about the world if Peter's map was the map that was pulled down when you were growing up, and the continent of Africa was large and front and center? How would you feel about the world? Would that change things? And that often leads to some pretty interesting discussions, especially if there's people in trainings that come from other parts of the world that, you know, have a different experience about, you know, what was the map that they were looking at growing up. Next slide, please. And then a lot of times we like to get playful, and we'll just throw in something like this, an upside down map, and ask, you know, is it wrong? Why is that when we think of the world, we orient it the other way? So we really like to, in cultural competency, have some fun, get people talking and thinking in different ways, and exploring the idea of right and wrong. Because again, for cultural competency, what you're really looking at is your own filters, your own triggers. Next slide, please. So this is actually a picture of some of the police officers at our agency being trained. As I said, it's a small number of folks in there. And there was just, you know, a lot of discussion, talking about cultures. It was not an easy day. It was a challenging training. There was a lot of stuff going on in there. The police department has a culture all of its own. But those were great days. And beyond the training, relationships were maintained and developed. So we make sure that we know our police department. We make sure that our police department gets to know who's coming to the city, who the new arrivals are. This isn't just a one-off for us. We found the funding for this training, which was about $8,000 in all. We had to write a grant to get it done in partnership with the police department. But I can tell you, going forward, both they and us and the communities that we serve, there was enormous positive kind of results from this, just in understanding, in relationships built and continuing to be built. So from my perspective, it would be great if city governments, county governments sort of put things in the budget for these sorts of trainings. And a lot of times they fall by the wayside. And the other thing, and I have to commend the police department for this, this was enormously difficult for them to make sure that every officer had a full day to participate in this training, and they were committed to it. So that's the other thing that kind of has to happen. And then out of this, we're doing, we're helping them recruit. They're really looking to diversify their police force. So they're coming on site and doing that with us. So it's been a wonderful relationship. Next slide, please. Next slide. No? Okay, thank you. So I included this just because a lot of people think when we're talking about cultural competency, we're talking about, you know, foreign-born folks, folks from, you know, different countries that come here. But really, it's always good to let people understand that the US has a lot of cultural diversity just within its own borders. And I think, you know, when you look at social cohesion nationally right now, you can certainly identify different cultural things happening in different parts of the country. So with the police department, we really, we talk about hillbilly elegy because Utica is obviously a city surrounded by suburbs and lots of rural spaces. Agriculture is the #1 industry in this county. So they actually had a lot to think about and talk about with regards to the difference between urban and rural. And it was just really great conversations. And I think was really good for them to think about culture, not just foreign-born and native-born Americans, but to really think about it in kind of a different, more broad way. Next slide, please. And finally, you know, we had lots of group discussions. This is actually at World Refugee Day in Utica. So our agency puts this on. This is on the lawn at City Hall. And this is a New York State trooper there working with our traffic safety coordinator. We have a traffic safety coordinator with the Somali Bantu community. And so this is what I'm talking about with relationship building. Everything we do is not meant to be a one-off. It's meant to create relationships and really keep the community connected and working together, knowing who each other is, and hopefully leading to you know, better outcomes, more understanding, empathy, all the things that you need to be working on when you're trying to make sure that groups aren't needlessly marginalized. And so cultural competency, there are literally thousands of people in this community that have now gone through our cultural competency training. We are constantly doing it. It is a continuous thing. And I do think it has been impactful in the way that our community you know, is educated about each other and communicates with each other. Next slide. So I want to talk about COVID, language and culture. So in March, this COVID crisis hit. I mean, you could see it coming, but from my perspective, on March 13th, I closed the agency. It was a Friday, and it just seemed like that happened so fast, and suddenly the whole country was shut down. And it was a crisis, certainly for the country. I cannot begin to tell you how many translation requests we got, immediately from the health department, the city, the police, schools, churches, just a crazy amount of translation requests, and stuff that we couldn't keep up with at all hours. And I've put up here just two examples of, here's one fact sheet that we translated into Karen. And we did that in probably 15 different languages. And that was just one fact sheet. We literally, over time, have probably done hundreds of documents. And it was illuminating in so many ways. The other thing to know about translations is it's not word for word. So the English language has far, far more words in it than the Karen language does. So when I hand a document to a translator, and there are words in there like shortness of breath, let's say phrases like that, that literally has very little meaning. If you were to translate that word for word in Karen, they wouldn't really know what it is you're trying to get at. So all these messages were coming out very rapidly with all these colloquialisms or just things that native English speakers would know exactly what you're talking about, and needed to be translated to communities that had low levels of health literacy. And really, there weren't words in their language to go with a lot of it. So it was a lot of work. It was far more time consuming than people realize. And for COVID, the other challenge was the message kept changing. We would get a translation out and be up literally. I had translators that were working around the clock, get it out, post it, and then 2 days later, the message changed slightly. There were also, when you talk about social cohesion, sometimes the message was local. It was what the county executive and the health department was saying, which usually matched what the governor was saying. It almost never matched what the president was saying. And a lot of refugee and immigrant communities really listen to the person that they think has the most power, so the president. Refugee communities also communicate with each other all around our country. So that diaspora of communities across the country were hearing different things depending on where they were. And this has been one of the most challenging experiences we've had and continue to have. We're continuing to work on this. The message continues to change. There's word that a vaccine is coming. There are so many rumors. Some communities don't trust vaccines in general. Some are hearing, herd immunity. Again, that's a term that has to be broken down because it's meaningless. And a lot of, if you were just to do a word for word translation. There was, the whole call your hotline was another huge issue that we had to deal with here in Utica. And the county hotline actually ended up in some communities putting our number there so that we could connect people with an interpreter if they really needed it. There was the whole take your temperature thing. We ended up distributing thousands of digital thermometers and teaching people how to do that because that just wasn't something that they were used to doing. There were just so many assumptions made around COVID and the response and what the community would know to do, and a whole lot of fear. So when you have changing messages and conflicting messages, there's this real, who to believe. We also have resettled, the Karen and the Burmese are Asian people. So there was some discrimination to be dealt with. There was some fear for them of how they were being treated in the community. So this was just such an eye-opening experience for us and the city. I literally had the mayor calling me probably twice a week to tell me, you know, we have things that were kind of going off the rails. So they closed the parks, but a lot of the ethnic communities didn't understand what that meant. Churches and mosques and temples were still gathering, so we had to send folks out and explain to them what the laws and rules were. Again, it's just been such an incredibly eye-opening experience, and really speaks to, I think Utica does have it pretty well together, and we certainly thought we had it pretty well together. This has just been an interesting experience. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I did early on in this thing, because there was so much fear and misunderstanding, was I just asked if we could take over the billboards in and around Utica. And they're not all owned by the city. A lot of them are privately owned, so it was really pretty challenging. And what we did was, I think we put up, I want to say 15 different languages that would scroll on these LED billboards. And essentially all they said was, we're in this together, stop the spread. And you can start to go through some of these billboards. Stay home and save lives. And, you know, so not like the most kind of in-depth message, but I really wanted to let the community know that they were seen, that we're paying attention, that the city sees you, that we're gonna make sure that we do everything we have to do to make sure that you're you know, getting the message, and to really work on, you know, community building. And one of the interesting things about this was, one, we almost had to hack into the software because a lot of the languages that are spoken here, the characters aren't, you know, A, B, C, D, E, they're a completely different font. So it was pretty challenging to do this, first of all. So I met some really smart computer folks that were really good at doing this. The other thing is, there was no money to do this. So for this first round of messages, it was $1,300, which the center just put out. And I just now got a grant to recoup some of those dollars. So again, these things happen and there's just no budget to kind of deal with this sort of thing. And I think that that is a huge, you know, problem going forward. There has to be an entity that's working to make sure that communities are seeing everybody. And we're not perfect, but we do a lot of that work here in Utica. And, you know, still we end up trying to sort of cobble together funds. We just, you know, go off and do what we think we have to do. So I think going forward, we'll be working much more closely with the city and the county to make sure that we have an emergency response plan, which is really what this was about, that is inclusive and has the tools in it to serve the whole community. So that's all I'm gonna share today. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Shelley, and thank you for giving us your time. We know you've been very busy. We've been sort of watching from afar, so thanks for everything you're doing and for coming to share these ongoing lessons with us today.
Sure.
So for our next presentation, going to invite Luis Roldan. He's a planner at the City of Albany, the Albany Department of Planning and Development, and a recent graduate of SUNY University at Albany's Master's in Regional Planning program, where he concentrated on community development, and the Urban Policy Graduate Certificate program. He co-authored the 2020 Comprehensive Plan for the Albany Community Development Agency, and he's also currently involved in the South End Strategic Plan and the South End Brownfields Opportunities Area Plan in Albany. He's been in the South End since 2007, but is a native originally to Queens. And he's going to share some of his lessons learned and his experiences from planning and his involvement in community initiatives focused on social and environmental justice. Over to you.
You, Laura. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Um, so I'm just going to go through real quick. I really want to hear about some of the input from the audience. So I'm going to mainly just focus on a couple of stories that I have in my experience. Like Laura said, I'm in the City of Albany Planning and Development Department, planner there, and I live in the South End in Albany, and I've been working very closely in the South End with a few efforts from the planning department there. I'm just going to go over social cohesion and what it means to me and what my experiences have been with that. Next slide, please. So I kind of like the previous definition that was given here with social cohesion, um, the extent of connectedness and solidarity among groups in society. I think it really speaks a lot to what I'm going to be talking about here. So we're going to go with that. But it basically it's working together towards a common goal. It's a mutual relationship based on respect and acknowledgement of each other's value. I kind of look at it as like a sports team. Even if they had the most gifted players, without any cohesion, their performance would probably suffer greatly. Next slide. So some of the pitfalls with a lack of cohesion are really centered around distrust. If we get into a habit of inconsistent messages, not following through with goals, or not following through fully with implementation of plans, if we have a lack of accountability, and all of these things kind of foster a environment of not having like a safe place to be vulnerable where you can express what your concerns are, because you don't feel like the person who's listening maybe has your best interests at heart. So my experience with the South End came about with the hearing what people had to say about the South End plan in 2007. We kind of had to go around hearing people's opinions about what went wrong with what the plan, or the 2007 plan. And one of the things that really was common was that there was a lot of ideas. It was just a lot of recommendations. But as soon as the plan went out, that's where it ended, and we didn't really have any accountability about following through with the implementation of those ideas, and there was inconsistency with who was supposed to be doing what, and essentially um, it just kind of dissolved, and a lot of the ideas that would have been great ideas just never came to fruition. So that's kind of the pitfalls, and I'm sure that it kind of just might describe a lot of people's experiences with getting feedback from the public on their planning efforts. Next slide. So the benefits of investing in social cohesion would be to get that trust, to get that public participation, getting it early and getting it in a meaningful way. You get higher quality feedback. The resulting feedback can lead to increased equality when you're able to better understand and address the needs of vulnerable communities, and results in a situation where if people are able to engage in a meaningful way, then there's a sense of safety, and if not safety, there's a sense of vulnerability, but vulnerability that is willing. And is in my experience with this actually comes from when I was younger, when I was living in New York City. I think about the post 9/11 attacks. I think I was in high school when this happened, and I remember that the days following that, there was almost like a surreal moment where everyone was kind of on the same page, across social statuses. No matter how much money or little money you had or what culture you came from, there was a sense that everyone was kind of on an equal footing of sorts, and that kind of is my go-to when I think of social cohesion and what it can look like. Albeit this one from a very tragic event, but it did result in, for a brief moment, everyone kind of feeling what it really means to really be on the same page, and be on the same team. So I think that there's a lot we can learn from both tragedies, but there's also a lot we can learn from our history as well. Next slide, please. So cohesion and buying, how to get this benefit of social cohesion. So like I previously mentioned, early and meaningful participation is the result of this. Local commitment to implementation is what you can, what we can do to try to address the social cohesion. But this is not common in marginalized groups. You know, we don't really get from the public a local commitment to implementation. You might have people getting excited about a plan, but you know, I think in areas that are historically underserved, you don't really get that kind of excitement. You don't get the participation, and it's not really something that really happens in these groups. So well, the question is why doesn't this happen? Why do we get less participation in communities where populations are marginalized, where the socioeconomic statuses are lower? Next slide. So this I think came out in January of this year. This is the Brandeis University study on child opportunity. And Albany is actually one of the top 10 for inequality for opportunity for children. And it's actually interesting because it's top 10 in two categories. It's top 10 for opportunities for white children having the most opportunity, and also top 10 for the lowest opportunities if you're not white. So this kind of speaks a lot to the disparities between socioeconomic groups and the resulting distrust from that. We talked about how cohesion is disrupted when there is racial and socioeconomic disparity, and this really speaks a lot to it. I think Albany in particular is interesting because you have a big mix of communities. You have very wealthy communities, obviously as represented here, where there's a lot of opportunities afforded to children who are white, and as well as communities where there's a predominant people of color, and the same opportunities for them are very different within the same city. Next slide, please. So how do we obtain trust in a situation like this? I think that trust really just comes down to believing something to be consistent of someone, and that can go either way. It can be either malicious or it can be you know, benevolent. For me, growing up in New York City, my viewpoint of government was always distrustful. You know, I grew up in a time when stop and frisk was still prevalent, and so I was harassed by police pretty commonly. Even in Albany, you know, didn't really stop there either. There was always encounters with police that you always had a fear of encounters with police in that sense. So it goes both ways. You know, if anything, I could trust that I could not trust the police, if that makes sense. Next slide, please. So to reverse that, to build cohesion in these neighborhoods, as a person of color, as a person who's grown up in marginalized communities, I feel that consistency is the first key to trust. If what we can expect to be as a consistent behavior leads to trust, then the first step is to decide what you want to be consistent about to build that trust. In 2020, the Black Lives Matter movement really swept the country and forced people to start thinking and having conversations about the inequities in our country. And for Albany, I think that the resulting studies showing the inopportunities between, or the lack of opportunities in people of color, communities of people of color, has led to policy actions that have helped for the city to become consistent and decide what to be consistent about. One of the policies that was implemented was the equity agenda by the mayor of our city, and that was an effort to kind of try to determine what it is or what the inequalities are within our communities, and how to address those inequalities by investing time and resources into to equalize, to normalize those inequalities. But I think that to be able to have that conversation, you have to be truthful, like Susan was talking about. You have to acknowledge the history. You have to acknowledge the mistakes made. You have to own them, or otherwise I believe that the message is going to fall on deaf ears. If what my experience in the South End has been is that the community only started to begin to trust when I was able to be consistent about acknowledging the history of how the South End became, how it is now. The history of racist policies, racial covenants, the real estate industry being, forcing people of color to be kind of segregated into these communities and then disinvesting into them. That all has to be said. That has a conversation that has to happen. And I feel that having that conversation up front with residents allows you the opportunity to have those hard conversations up front, so that when you have those conversations, the first step of trying to reconcile with that and move forward in finding common ground can be had. Otherwise, if you come in and say that, something happened in the past, we don't know what happened, that things got the way they are, you're not really acknowledging and validating anybody's experience. And you're only breeding more distrust because there's no honesty and consistency there about the message. So I believe that, and we're available, this is kind of a difficult topic because it's tough to take a political stance, I feel, about anti-racism, but in these neighborhoods, if you're trying to build social cohesion, it's important to do that, to validate the human experience and value of people's lives, and to also validate their individual experiences, and not to say that, not to try to write them away as one of many, but rather listen to each individual one and give that individual the weight that it deserves, because if that is not part of the whole, if it's not, if individually those experiences amount to the whole, then discounting any of them is discounting the whole as well, or working towards it. So that's kind of my experience with social cohesion in the South End. The next slide, please. So basically acknowledging truth, validating the frustration that people have, committing to equitable inclusion priorities, and being honest and empowering honest and other people. I think for our projects, it's been a great help that our leadership has been able to empower honesty. Sometimes we're kind of put in a position where we can't make statements that would acknowledge truth or validate frustration or commit to equitable inclusion priorities. And in those instances, we're kind of working against ourselves and building trust. And we kind of silence conversations before they can even start. So I think that something to take away here that would help is doing that, is committing to what it is that you want to be consistent about, being honest about it, and empowering other employees to be also honest about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. And we are pretty much on time, which is fantastic. So we're going to open this up for questions. Let me just get some open. So please send them in. I have one so far, but if you have your questions, please get them in now. We have a good 15 minutes or so with our panelists here. So I'm going to start off. This is a question for Shelley from Christine. She's asking, how has the center worked with the city? Has the center worked with the city planning department in any city planning efforts?
Yeah, kind of. And mostly I would say recently with the Economic Development Council and through the DRI and things like that. There's a lot of things that happen in Utica because it's a small city that are just kind of off the record, which I think is great for the people that already have the relationships and the power. It's a little challenging for the newcomers. As I mentioned, the mayor is as likely to call me up on any given day if something pops up, or if there's an opportunity or something going on as he would. It's just it's an interesting little town. I'm not originally from here. It's taken me a while to get my feet under me. But yes, we've also worked with Cornell Cooperative Extension. They've come in and done some city planning and worked specifically with the agency and our clients. So the ethnic communities that are around there, there's been some gardens planned and things like that. So yes, I'm also on the Access and Inclusion Committee, which is a committee the mayor runs to fight racism and to work with marginalized communities. And I just have to say in my little bit here, what Lewis was saying about how being anti-racist is suddenly political is just one of the most baffling developments, I think, of my life. When did being anti-racist become political? Just had to put that out there.
And it's a good reminder, if the panelists have questions for each other, please feel free to jump in. Luisa, I wanted to follow up. You were talking about being consistent and building back that trust. And I know Albany has a lot of programs and projects that you're trying to get on the ground and working on right now. Can you maybe talk about experiences where you have program goals and you come in and you kind of hit that barrier of distrust and how you've handled that, maybe some tips for planners on how they can start those conversations or have the patience to work through that even when they're on certain timelines and deliverables?
Yeah, I feel we had actually, Alana and I have had a meeting with, I believe, one of the groups in the South End who was kind of in that's the same way when the meeting started. They started off by saying, hey, we're going to be really honest about, what we feel. So they were really telling us up front that they didn't really have a lot of stock and trust with us. And it took a lot of talking to them beforehand on my end here to kind of just get us into the room and say, hey, I know that you don't really trust us and what historically has come from our office. But I'm coming from a place of honesty. I've acknowledged the history and validate that you're frustrated about the experience that you've had thus far with municipal government and organizations in our city. And it took having that conversation first to even begin to say, hey, let's sit down and talk about this plan to see what we can do further. So before you can even get there, I know it's difficult when you're a consultant coming into a community that you may not necessarily be resident to, but I believe that's where the municipal offices have to step in and developing and a culture of being connected with the organizations that are effectuating change in the communities. For us, it's been successful that I was able to do that as a South End resident, as a person of color, as a person familiar with the history in living in communities that I've been disinvested in. I have firsthand kind of experience and knowledge in that, and I can relate to and to that experience. So I think maybe have the best case scenario would be to have employed the people who can represent these perspectives and ideas. I know planning as a general is not necessarily the most diverse professional field. So I think that could be the first step, is trying to get people in these positions that are actually able to honestly say that they understand these experiences, more sympathize and empathize, I believe, if I have those right. So I think that's a good step, but also acknowledging that trust is built over time with consistency. So if you have a history of being inconsistent, then it starts with setting a track record of consistency. And that means you have to be, if not at a municipal level, then at least at a department level, or pushing for that. Because I think that it was a tough sell up until the point where we were able to honestly have that conversation in our department to say we need to be honest about the history. We need to acknowledge the truth. We need to validate the frustration. Because otherwise we don't have a conversation to start with. We just have more distrust, and anything we say is falling on deaf ears. So really taking the time to build and nurture those relationships is the first, is the first goal. It should be from the municipal level. From the consultant side is to try to to push that as well on municipal governments. I think that's important, and I don't know why we're not doing that more, and we don't have more voices that represent these communities that we're trying to effectuate change in. So I think that's the first step, I think.
And that reminds me of the separate sides of the issue that we've kind of been addressing in our presentations here. You have sort of social integration and cohesion within groups and communities, but then you also have the integration in institutions and getting the legal structures and the public safety officials and these systems working for everyone, and sort of that two-way street of building understanding and integration. So I'm wondering if anyone might have an example of where they went into a participatory planning discussion or some outreach program, and they were able to identify or maybe influence a legal structure or barrier or some kind of systemic, affect some systemic change through this. Maybe any examples? Just a small question.
Yeah, I think it's possible that in our case here with the South End Strategic Plan and the inclusion of the Mayor's Equity Agenda, giving us the, I guess you would say, empowering us to be able to promote policy changes. I think one of the resulting policies that's coming about is a review of our building codes. Sam Wells, who's our neighborhood stabilization coordinator at the city, has really been pushing for policy changes that allow for the enforcement of our codes to be more equitable, acknowledging that the enforcement of codes equally in our city is essentially creating a disparate impact on our communities. So being able to acknowledge that and trying to effectuate policies that takes that into consideration, I think that was a win I'm not sure if it's actually passed or not, but it's in the process, and I think that's a big step in trying to bring more equity into the policy side of zoning and codes.
Anyone else have any examples, maybe of unexpected outcomes, either on building social bonds or, identifying policy barriers that have come out of some of these practices we talked about?
I would just add, when you talk about social cohesion, a lot of cultures kind of come at negotiations differently. So we had the Karen had a community-based organization, and they asked some of us to be on the board, and it was a really eye-opening experience because, on our board, typically things eventually come to a vote, and then, the prevailing vote wins. They were much more about consensus. So they really wanted everybody to be in agreement. And then there was all sorts of other dynamics around culture with, what was the elder thinking and just things that are, not typical of sort of American cultural sort of, board management. And so watching that play out as more folks kind of join the civic life and bring their cultural expectations and traditions has been really interesting. We had some really great candidates run for city council this past election. Bosnian woman, she didn't win, but it was close. But you could really just feel, some of those, just things work a little bit differently, in their cultures, how they support each other, how they come to decisions. It's interesting and fascinating. And if you make room to explore all that, your community's richer for it.
I'm going to go in a different direction here. There's a question from Jody on how social media has impacted social cohesion, if we've seen some changes in our careers. Over the course of our careers.
I can address that just through my personal experience over the past 6 months, and utilizing social media as a positive tool for social cohesion. I'm thinking about neighborhood association meetings or organization meetings that I've attended online. And I've noticed that compared to before having Facebook meetings or Zoom or whatever, you didn't have as high attendance, especially in distressed communities, as I mentioned before, where people might be working jobs or they might have lack of transportation or it just they can't get time off or they can't get childcare. And having social media and having that as a vehicle to meet, I think it's made it's increased attendance and it's improved social cohesion among the neighborhoods that I personally have dealt with. I know others' experience might be different, but that's been mine.
We have a large walk-in population every day that walks in for services pre-COVID. So that's been, I think, a sea change. Some things work really well. Connectivity is an issue for some of the populations we serve. So we've been looking for grants to not only help us get, the technology in their hand, like a Chromebook, but also ways to make sure that they have internet access. Once that's done and folks kind of know how to navigate the system, I do think we're doing ESL classes online. We're doing all sorts of social cohesion things online now, and it is working.
So our experiences on Facebook, Twitter, and such social media, kind of positive actually lately, or have there been any negative experiences that we've seen where it's eroding social cohesion that might have been there previously?
I think social media has been kind of crazy lately. I mean, there was rumor of riots that were going to happen in Utica a couple of weeks ago that was all over social media and scared a whole lot of people. That they did not come to pass. It turned out to be untrue, meant to sort of rile up folks. It did that. And there was a lot of work for the city and other folks to kind of keep folks calm. I think it's a double-edged sword. I think there's really wonderful things that can come from it, but also sometimes it's, almost dangerous.
Yeah, useful tool depending on how it's used, exactly. This is a little related to that. We have a question on kind of asking for us to give some more explanation on the impact, if any, of COVID on programs and training and participation and the effectiveness of the types of outreach that we've been talking about and how we are or have been planning to address this, overcome these barriers that COVID's now putting up for these participatory program and training sessions we do.
Again, I can speak to my personal experience on this. We've actually seen a huge increase in terms of public participation by going virtual. And it's something that Alan is going to consider. We still, you always like the face-to-face. You like to be able to answer questions. You like to get community members together and talking. So I don't think that will ever go away. But I think we are now going to supplement those one-on-one sessions or those real world public engagement with virtual, because so many more people can participate. And we've seen real positive results in terms of gathering information. So.
I agree. I think we'll now going forward have a hybrid model for most of our programs, but it has been really impactful, kind of in a bad way, for our programs where there has to be in-person participation, like immigration and citizenship. You have to bring in your papers, you have to be photographed, you have to have these interviews, you have to have a notary there. And there's just been huge delays with lots of federal agencies. So COVID in general has been enormously impactful. We just resettled 23 newly arrived refugees last month, and for the first 2 weeks they had to be quarantined. So we were doing all of those new arrival services remotely, which was pretty challenging.
just want to add to what Sue was saying, and on the positive side of things, something I think we've been noticing with Elon too is actually how the quality of the responses you get through the online can be a lot richer than what you might get on a post-it note, where it's a little hard to write out your full explanation of your thoughts. But when you're doing a survey, you get some of these really rich explanations and these threads throughout the survey. You can sort of follow how the person's responding to the different questions being asked of them. And something we've been thinking about, though, is how to balance that by making sure the community, how these responses are visible, because that's something with, of course, an in-person open house. You see who else is there. You're having these kind of side conversations. You can kind of, as a community member, start to see what other community members are thinking. If you're just doing a survey and you can't see what other people are saying, you lose that. So we're looking at trying to make sure we're feeding back these responses, and there's maybe some live sessions where there's discussion or something to make sure that the community is hearing each other, because that's often a very positive outcome. And maybe a secondary impact of that outreach that we're doing is it's bringing those different groups together to talk to each other. Sometimes even if they work in the same field, this might be the first time they've really discussed a particular issue together, and then that leads to these positive engagements outside of the specific project that we were brought in for. So we don't want to lose that, because that's really I think a common positive outcome we see across all of our projects, is those secondary relationships and partnerships that happen. So trying to make sure we're not losing that when we're doing everything online now during COVID. So, all right, we're coming toward the end of our session. So I just want to have sort of an open question. Is there anything else that any of the panelists would like to add or respond to in terms of tips for building social cohesion and resilience of communities? No final words.
Just thank you to Shelley and Luis. I really enjoyed hearing your story and more about your organizations.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you to all of our speakers and to the APA Upstate New York chapter for hosting. I think I might pass back to the host here to close out the session. And this has all been recorded. Our information and some of our citations and contact information are throughout the slides. So please feel free to reach out to us with any questions that we might not have gotten to during the presentation. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you, Laura. And again, thank you to our speakers today, Laura, Susan, Shelley, and Louise, and as well as our sponsor for today's session, Elan Planning, Design, and Landscape Architecture, and to the attendees who joined us today. I think we were upwards of over 50 attendees today. So thank you all for carving out a part of your day for our session today. Our next session is tomorrow at 3 p.m. and is entitled When Small Projects Lead to Big Impact. Again, that's at 3 p.m. tomorrow. Thanks again. Enjoy the rest of the 2020 APA Upstate New York chapter conference and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.